Good evening and welcome to BBC News. The Sri Lankan president has dismissed David Cameron's calls for an independent investigation into alleged war crimes carried out at the end of the country's civil war. Mahinda Rajapaksa made it clear he'll resist pressure to hold an inquiry. Mr Cameron said if Sri Lanka refuses, he'll push for the UN to conduct its own investigation. James Robbins reports from Colombo. Well, with us now is Nirmala Rajasingham, one of the founder members for the Sri Lanka Democracy Forum, who are not affiliated to any political party on the island, which brings its own problems with it, Nirmala. What did the President, Mahinda Rajapaksa, have in mind when it was decided Sri Lanka would host this summit? More effective to have said to Sri Lanka, look, you can't host this summit at all? Very little by refusing to turn up. The government, of course, says we've held our own internal inquiries into what happened during the civil war and after the end of the war as well. And let's not forget, of course, that the Sri Lankan government regards the Tamil Tigers as terrorists. How great is the danger, though, that when everyone goes home, it'll all be forgotten, even though David Cameron has, of course, as you say, made these new links with the people who live in the north of Sri Lanka. Rajasingham from the Sri Lanka Democracy Forum, thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you. Doctors and nurses who deliberately neglect their patients could face criminal charges and up to 5 years in jail under new plans being put forward by the government. The offence of willful neglect would apply to health workers in England and Wales. It's one of a number of proposals aimed at making staff more accountable following the scandal at Mid Staffordshire NHS Trust. Tons of food, water and other supplies are being distributed to the worst affected parts of the Philippines as the international aid effort finally reaches many of those most in need. The British government has increased its aid to £50 million and the Disasters Emergency Committee says it's raised £33 million with its appeal for donations. The Foreign Office says a number of British nationals remain unaccounted for following last week's typhoon. Well, many people in the Philippines have been helping in the relief effort by packing food supplies for their fellow countrymen. Rico Hizon has visited a government relief depot in Mandaue City on Cebu Island. 7 people have been arrested on suspicion of murder following the discovery of human remains at the bottom of a well in the garden of a house in Surrey. Police have appealed for help in identifying the body. One of Britain's most wanted criminals has escaped from police after being stopped in his car in Lancashire. You're watching BBC News. It's 8:15. These are our headlines. Sport now for a full roundup from the BBC Sports Centre. 5 years after opening, one of the West Midlands' most talked about art centres has closed its doors today. The public in West Bromwich cost more than £72 million to build, but the local council says it can no longer afford to spend the £30,000 a week needed to keep it open. Let's cross the newsroom now and join Helen Willits for the weather forecast. Hi, Helen.
Good evening, Martine. It's been, for most, a rather cloudy and cool day, but we have seen some warmth up in the Highlands of Scotland. We had 15 degrees Celsius here. We won't see that sort of temperature for a good few days now, because although Sunday promises to be again relatively cloudy, very little rain, there will be some patchy frost again, and then next week it turns colder still. So through the evening and overnight, our weather front, we have got a weak weather front giving a lot of this cloud sinks southwards. To the north of it, yes, it turns much colder. We'll have a widespread frost here, just a slight frost for most places. Just the odd pocket of fog in the south, but it will be quite misty and grey, some fog in the north as well. But we've got that sandwich, if you like, for tomorrow with this damper weather gradually starting to pep up a bit, actually, the rain, and push its way back northwards into the southwest of Scotland. So that sunshine diminishes, the fog will clear at least. In southern areas, well, very limited brightness. It looks largely dry, but even here we can't rule out the odd spot of rain or drizzle, and temperatures will be a little depressed as a result, just 9 or 10, and really quite cold underneath this band of cloudy, wet weather. But if you think that's cold, you wait till you see what's coming in for next week. Much colder Arctic air blasts its way southwards by the end of Monday, an increasing risk of ice and even snow.
This is BBC News. I'm Martine Crocxall. Our headlines. Now, BBC News, it's time for Talking Business. A Democracy Forum, which isn't affiliated to any political party on the island. I asked her why the Sri Lankan president had offered to host the Commonwealth Summit in the first place. Nirmala Rajasingham from the Sri Lanka Democracy Forum. Doctors and nurses who deliberately neglect their patients could face criminal charges and up to 5 years in jail under new plans being put forward by the government. The offence of willful neglect would apply to health workers in England and Wales. It's one of a number of proposals aimed at making staff more accountable following the scandal at Mid Staffordshire NHS Trust. Well, a lot has been spoken about the immediate needs in the aftermath of Typhoon Haiyan, but what are the long-term challenges and what happens if these aren't met? Let's speak to Justin. Welcome to BBC News. Let's just deal with the immediate, if we can, first of all. What sort of progress are your teams seeing now? To raise funds now, while all of these pictures are on our screens, than it will be when the cameras have gone away?
Well, yeah, you're right.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're watching BBC News. Our headlines at 9:15. 7 people have been arrested on suspicion of murder following the discovery of human remains at the bottom of a well in the garden of a house in Surrey. Police have appealed for help identifying the body. Richard Slee has the latest from outside the house in Wallingham. A suicide bomber has attacked a police checkpoint in the Afghan capital Kabul, killing 1 police officer and 9 civilians. The blast wounded more than 20 people. The incident took place near the site where hundreds of tribal leaders are expected to gather next week to discuss future relations with the United States. The Taliban have claimed responsibility for the attack. Our World Affairs correspondent Mike Waldridge reports. It's a country that's seen war and violence for nearly a quarter of a century, so the challenge facing Iraq in providing a stable, working education system has become increasingly difficult. Now the Iraqi government is turning to the UK for assistance, in particular the ideas of one teacher who for the last 3 years has been swapping his classroom in Berkshire for one in Baghdad. Ben Moore reports. Camden Lock in North London has been drained and open to the public for one weekend only. The lock, officially called Hampstead Road Lock, is about to undergo huge repairs as a part of a multi-million-pound restoration project to improve 100 locks across the country. Nicola Ford reports. So be quick. Nicola Ford reporting there. Time for a look at the weather forecast with Helen. More now on the plans to introduce a new criminal offence of willful neglect for NHS medical staff in England who abuse or mistreat patients. Health workers found guilty could receive a prison sentence of up to 5 years. The Health Minister, Lord Howe, says the law is needed to avoid scandals such as the mistreatment of patients at Stafford Hospital. Doctors' representatives have warned that the legislation could deter people from speaking out. Dr Helen Stokes-Lampard is from the Royal College of GPs. Some campaigners have welcomed the idea of criminalising so-called willful neglect of patients. Julie Bailey founded Cure the NHS, a group highlighting poor care at Stafford Hospital after her mother died at the hospital in November 2007. The Shadow Health Secretary Andy Burnham says the proposal should be introduced alongside other measures detailed in a report into failings at Stafford Hospital, but he argued the government to tread carefully to avoid denigrating staff. Just 5 years after opening, one of the West Midlands' most talked about art centres has closed its doors today. The public in West Bromwich cost more than £72 million to build, but the local council says it can no longer afford to spend £30,000 a week needed to keep it open. At 10 to 10, we'll be joined by viewers on BBC One for a full bulletin with Clive Myrie. First, it's time for the film review with Gavin Esler and Mark Kermode. Main story this evening. The Sri Lankan president has dismissed David Cameron's calls for an independent investigation into alleged war crimes carried out at the end of the country's civil war. Nirmala Rajasingham is one of the founder members of the Sri Lanka Democracy Forum, which isn't affiliated to any political party on the island. I asked her why the Sri Lankan president had offered to host the Commonwealth Summit in the first place. As we've been hearing, aid is now beginning to arrive in some of the worst-hit cities in the Philippines after Typhoon Haiyan. Our correspondent Rajesh Merchandani is in Tacloban and has been looking at how clean water is being made available to survivors. You're watching BBC News at 17 minutes past 10. These are our headlines. A suicide bomber has attacked a police checkpoint in the Afghan capital Kabul, killing 1 police officer and 9 civilians. The blast wounded more than 20 people. The incident took place near the site where hundreds of tribal leaders are expected to gather next week to discuss future relations with the United States. The Taliban have claimed responsibility for the attack. Camden Lock in North London has been drained and open to the public for one weekend only. The lock is about to undergo huge repairs as part of a multi-million-pound restoration project to improve 100 locks across the country. Nicola Ford reporting from Camden Lock. One of Britain's most wanted criminals has escaped from police after being stopped in his car in Lancashire. This week sees the 30th anniversary of the start of online banking in the UK. Over the years, the technology has got faster, smaller and smarter. But what does the future hold? Our technology correspondent Dave Lee has been investigating. For centuries, the hills of Dartmoor have had a rather unusual feature. Thousands of ponies roaming the land, but that could now be coming to an end. A collapsing market means things are changing for the animals and for the farmers who've relied upon them. Sarah Ransom has been finding out more. Forecast now with Helen Willett.
Good evening. It's been a relatively mild autumn so far, but next week I think will be a shock to the system for many of us. Now, it's been chilly enough under this blanket of cloud today, but we had 15 degrees in northern Scotland. That won't be repeated tomorrow. In fact, it's turning really quite chilly already as the skies are clearing behind our weather front. We'll see a widespread frost develop here, some patchy fog through the central lowlands. Further south should be enough cloud to prevent a frost, largely speaking, but the odd pocket can't be ruled out, as can't the odd pocket of fog, but it will generally be quite misty and murky here. So a bit of a grey start, disappointing. I think sunshine will be more limited. There will be a little bit of brightness around, don't get me wrong, but also a splash or two of rain, nuisance value more than anything else. If there is a little fog around, potentially the Vale of York in southern areas could be a little reluctant to clear, which is fairly typical for this time of year. And then we run into our weather front, likely sat across parts of North Wales, Northern England, parts of Northern Ireland as well. So some rain here. But despite a little bit of fog and the frost, it will be a fine start across Scotland. The best of the sunshine here, at least through the morning, because by the afternoon we start to see this weather front just pepping up a little bit and starting to nudge northwards once again into southern and western parts of Scotland. So it might well edge towards Murrayfield and Edinburgh for the Rugby Union here through the afternoon. Certainly give a cold afternoon if you're underneath that rain, 5 or 6 degrees, but anyway, 8 to 10 the highest we can expect. And then the rain peps up even further through tomorrow evening and overnight, joining forces with another weather front coming down from the north. That's a significant front. It's behind that we have that Arctic air. For most of us, a relatively mild but rather mucky night, behind which then into Monday it turns much colder with our first blast of Arctic air. So Monday, for most of us, is a day of transition. There'll be some rain, some long spells of rain for a time across much of England, Wales. But for Northern Ireland and Scotland, already the brighter, colder, showery weather is starting to take shape. And by the end of the day, snow showers are expected even to lower levels across the northern and the western Isles. And then through Monday evening and overnight, that blast of Arctic air will push our weather front well and truly out of the way, allowing that cold air to come right the way southwards by Tuesday morning. So a widespread frost to start the day. These are temperatures by day, so a significant wind chill factor and increasingly those showers being wintry.